Today we will be playing Rainbow Friends Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Don't mind I have the tires, I'm not...
Outside of the building. It's like construction. That's busted. There's this building with a really sharp tip.
Okay, I see this one together. So let's start the game.
Oh, confirmed. You skydive into a jet that is turned on. It'll actually reverse skydive you. Oh, it does work. Fish can survive outside of water. Plop them right here. Oh. If you put it at 7 p.m. at night, something will spawn over here. And there's cops over here. Deers will actually move out of the way if you try to skydive on top of them.
Okay.
He hears you! What? The deer is actually faster than the train in GTA 5. The deer is actually very slightly faster than the train. That is confirmed. There's this huge opening in the building. But is this opening the outside of the building? If I just go outside of the building, it's like construction. That's busted. There's this building with a really sharp tip. Apparently you can do push-ups on it. That looks so painful. Oh, confirmed. You skydive into a jet that is turned on. It'll actually reverse skydive you. Oh, it does work. Fish can survive outside of water. Plop them right here. If you put it at 7 p.m. at night, something will spawn over here. And there's cops over here. Deers will actually move out of the way if you try to skydive on top of them. Yeah, he hears you.
Oh my.
The deer is
Bro,
actually
why is it
faster
moving?
than the train in GTA 5. The deer is actually very slightly faster than the train. That is confirmed. There's this huge opening
Follow
in
me.
the building. But is this opening the outside of the building? If I just go outside of the building, it's like construction. That's busted. There's this building with a really sharp tip. Apparently you can do push-ups on it. That looks so painful. Oh, confirmed. You skydive into a jet that is turned on. It'll actually reverse skydive you. Oh, it does work. Fish can survive outside of water. Plop them right here. Oh. If you put it at 7 p.m. at night, something will spawn over here. And there's cops over here. Deers will actually move out of the way if you try to skydive on top of them. Yeah, he hears you! What? The deer is actually faster than the train in GTA 5. The deer is actually very slightly faster than the train. That is confirmed. There's this huge opening in the building. But is this opening the outside of the building? If I just go outside of the building, it's like construction. That's busted. There's this building with a really sharp tip. Apparently you can do push-ups on it. That looks so painful. Oh, confirmed. You skydive into a jet that is turned on. It'll actually reverse skydive you. Oh, it does work. Fish can survive outside of water. Plop them right here. Oh. If you put it at 7 p.m. at night, something will spawn over here. And there's cops over here. Deers will actually move out of the way if you try to skydive on top of them. Yeah, he hears you! What? The deer is actually faster than the train in GTA 5. The deer is actually very slightly faster than the train. That is confirmed. There's this huge opening in the building. But is this opening the outside of the building? If I just go outside of the building, it's like construction. That's busted. There's this building with a really sharp tip. Apparently you can do push-ups on it. That looks so painful. Oh, confirmed. You skydive into a jet that is turned on. It'll actually reverse skydive you. Oh, it does work. Fish can survive outside of water. Plop them right here. Oh. If you put it at 7 p.m. at night, something will spawn over here. And there's cops over here. Deers will actually move out of the way if you try to skydive on top of them. Yeah, he hears you! What? The deer is actually faster than the train in GTA 5. The deer is actually very slightly slightly faster than the train. That is confirmed. There's this huge opening in the building. But is this opening the outside of the building? If I just go outside of the building, it's like construction. That's busted. There's this building with a really sharp tip. Apparently you can do push-ups on it. That looks so painful. Oh, confirmed. You skydive into a jet that is turned on, it'll actually reverse skydive you.
Bro, I just survived doing nothing.
Fish can survive outside of water. Plop them right here. Oh. If you put it at 7 p.m. at night, something will spawn over here. And there's cops over here. Confirmed. Deers will actually move out of the way if you try to skydive on top of them. Yeah, he hears you! What? The deer is actually faster than the train in GTA 5. The deer is actually very slightly faster than the train. That is confirmed. There's this huge opening in the building. But is this opening the outside of the building? If I just go outside of the building, it's like construction. That's busted. There's this building with a really sharp tip. Apparently you can do push-ups on it. That looks so painful. Oh, confirmed. You skydive into a jet that is turned on. It'll actually reverse skydive you. It does work. Fish can survive outside of water. Plop them right here. If you put it at 7 p.m. at night, something will spawn over here. And there's cops over here. Deers will actually move out of the way if you try to skydive on top of them. Yeah, he hears you! What? The deer is actually faster than the train in GTA 5. The deer is
Right here?
very slightly faster than the train. That is confirmed. There's this huge opening in the building. But is this opening the outside of the building? If I just go outside of the building, it's like construction. That's busted. There's this building with a really sharp tip. Apparently you can do push-ups on it. That looks so painful. Oh, confirmed. You skydive into a jet that is turned on. It'll actually reverse skydive you. It does work. Fish can survive outside of water. Plop them right here. If you put it at 7 p.m. at night, something will spawn over here. And there's cops over here. Deers will actually move out of the way if you try to skydive on top of them. Yeah, he hears you! What? The deer is actually faster than the train in GTA 5. The deer is actually very slightly faster than the train. That is confirmed. There's this huge opening in the building. But is this opening the outside of the building? If I just go outside of the building, it's like construction. That's busted. There's this building with a really sharp tip. Apparently you can do push-ups on it. That looks so painful. Oh, confirmed. You skydive into a jet that is turned on. It'll actually reverse skydive you. Oh, it does work. Fish can survive outside of water. Plop them right here. If you put it at 7 p.m. at night, something will spawn over here. And there's cops over here. Deers will actually move out of the way if you try to skydive on top of them. Yeah, he hears you! What? The deer is actually faster than the train in GTA 5. The deer is actually very slightly faster than the train. That is confirmed. There's this huge opening in the building. But is this opening the outside of the building? If I just go outside of the building, it's like construction. That's busted. There's this building with a really sharp tip. Apparently you can do push-ups on it. That looks so painful. Oh, confirmed. You skydive into a jet that is turned on. It'll actually reverse skydive you. Oh, it does work. Fish can survive outside of water. Plop them right here. If you put it at 7 p.m. at night, and there's cops over here.
Where? Bro, why the what? Bro, I'm just watching some videos of mine.
We know you're hovering over that button, but we need your help. We have a better button, we promise. Right on tip. Let's face it, swamps are pretty honest. Even without any history of unsavory incidents or cryptids, damn, gloomy places just seem to inspire dread in anyone who looks upon them. But as you'll soon see, sometimes there's more to be afraid of.
Bro, I'm just letting people do this until I get to chapter 2. Well, actually, on the last part, I'm gonna have to run. All I'm doing is saving up my stamina on my hands, so I don't have to worry about that. So, Mom just got us new kitties. The last kitties got killed by enemies. Oh my eyes.
Oh shit! Watch your mamas.
What happened?
I didn't realize she was right behind me.
You literally almost just pushed her out of existence, Mom.
Pretty much. Here, Amy.
Mom, I found a bad orange in here.
Yeah, so.
Look, I'm not gonna touch a green orange. Mom, why would I touch a green orange?
It's not gonna hurt you.
It's disgusting. That's literally the only orange that is that color.
Then we gotta remove it from the other ones.
Can you do it? Because I'm thirsty.
What if my finger falls off?
Go get CPR.
How is CPR gonna help with my finger falling off?
It would like hurt your
doesn't
god. They'll give CPR to your finger. And it will just magically grow out of existence. Wow. Magic. God. Bro, I'm recording a video of me playing Rainbow Friends Chapter 2 and Chapter 1. I just remembered. I had my voice on. Bro, literally somewhere in the video it's just gonna sound, it's just gonna be me saying, imagination. It's talking about CPR for the finger.
Yeah. Even though Elodie chose her ex-husband to be there.
Okay, we're getting closer to having to refill this water jug. It's still pouring water normally. Once it starts dripping, we have to change it, right? Can I pour these in? Here. What are these?
They're little. Plastic cups.
I think it's definitely more complicated in DeAndre's relationship with Elodie because not only does he need to be mature.
For a mom, we're gonna be drinking in style. Have your drop. Have your cup. Bro, Mom. What happens if all seafood cups were shrunken?
It's still something I like adjusting to. I think like I could come to terms with being like a stepfather and stuff like that if I had like the time and
Right, but the fact that you're saying, oh,
I've never been able to drink water so fast.
I can't hear my show, dude.
Okay.
and you'd be a little bit more like decided on the matter by now.
when it comes to being a stepdad, what I'm trying to strive to and get to,
Okay,
she's already done. She's already done.
hey, bye, Mom.
That's two things.
Bye, Mom. I'm going back to the room.
So
Avi, go get it. Go get it, Avi. I'm gonna try to get Avi to go grab a kitty.
The area
Avi.
and has in recent years skyrocketed in population, decimating indigenous plant and animal species. Ryan and Kevin
Avi,
knew that
why
if
did
they
you put
managed to
that
catch
on
even
the
a single one,
floor?
they could reel in up to $150 as a reward. Easy money if you've got the stones for the job. Ryan and Kevin were hunting along the
Get a
L28
kitty.
tieback, a canal
Go,
about
go,
35
get one of
miles
them
west
little
of
kitties.
Miami, when just before midnight they spotted an incredibly long female snake slinking through the swampy waters. Kevin, who had never seen a snake as big, couldn't stop his hands from shaking as they waded in after it. Careful not to spook the snake by splashing too much, Ryan secured its tail, while Kevin tried to get its head under control. The snake immediately started to rise, and it took the pair's full strength to keep the python from breaking free and potentially wrapping itself around.
Go get a kitty.
Finally, once they managed to
A
pull
puppy?
the slippery beast out of the canal, Ryan and Kevin
Leave.
went to pass.
No.
When they had it weighed,
You're not gonna get anything, then leave. No, what? No, a.
the record-breaking python is only one of 5,000 birds pythons released from the Everglades in 2017 and 2020. So next time you find yourself splashing around in the swamps and marshes of Florida, if you feel something large, mean, and scaly brush your feet, it's a gator. The Whistler. When he was 8 years old, Reddit user Bing Bong 123 loved to take late night walks with his mom.
Just spit in water.
The streets were
Baby, don't.
Jaelyn, don't be getting my four-way or I'm gonna have you completely clean it up
I
by
didn't
yourself.
do it. Amy did.
It doesn't matter. You're helping her during that stuff.
11 p.m.
Oh, Mom, I didn't even spit. She's the one that did.
Then you need to be telling her no, not laughing.
No, Amy. Do not sprit the water.
Amy, stop it now!
At first,
No.
Predator thought it was a bird, but something about
Don't shoot me about that.
lurking in the dark depths of the swamp.
Y'all are gonna piss me the fuck off!
The whistle's pitch continued to rise,
Hold me down, Aviana!
and as it did, Bing Bong's mom
Okay, guys, I'm back. I'll do something.
She grabbed the Redditor's hand and made them return home immediately, without ever explaining why. And at 8 years old, Bing Bong didn't really think about asking. 2 years passed, and with the incident lost at the back of his mind, the Redditor decided to take his dog out again, only this time by himself. He finished the walk without much trouble to the back, to the edge of the swamp, and bordering a gloomy swamp. On one particular evening at around 11 p.m., as Bing Bong and his mom were walking along the edge of the swamp, an eerie noise echoed through the air. Whistling. At first, the Redditor thought it was a bird, but something about it made it sound distinctively human-like. But who could be lurking in the dark depths of the swamp alone at this time of night? The whistle's pitch continued to rise and fall, and as it did, Bing Bong's mom grew visibly concerned. She grabbed the Redditor's hand and made them return home immediately, without ever explaining why. And at 8 years old, Bing Bong didn't really think about asking. 2 years passed, and with the incident lost at the back of his mind, the Redditor decided to take his dog out again, only this time by himself. He finished the walk without much trouble, but just as he passed one particular spot at the swamp's edge, he heard it again, the whistle. As soon as it reached his ears, a chill traveled down his spine.
Bing Bong immediately returned home and made sure never to pass that spot in the dark again. For more than a decade, he actually succeeded in avoiding the Whistler's clutches until one foggy night when he was 24 years old. Having recently moved from Michigan to South Dakota, Bing Bong and his girlfriend decided to spend Independence Day camping along the bank of the Missouri River, where they could relax and watch the fireworks. For the festivities, the police had cleared the river of any boats, so the Redditor, being a videographer, decided to seize the opportunity and film the calm, empty waters for a bit. Only, it appeared, not all the boats had obeyed the no-boating order. Somewhere, on the shadowy lake, the Redditor heard the unmistakable sound of a paddle methodically dipping in and out of the water.
No wonder Ebony is the #1 strategy game. Let's try it together. Here I come. All the treasures. Good job. Oh no.
He squinted into the growing darkness and could just make out a figure steering a canoe about 65 feet offshore. Brushing it off, Bing Bong continued to film the lake until suddenly he heard something that left him frozen, riddled with goosebumps. A slow whistling. The exact same whistle he had heard all those years ago. Unable to make out the whistler's face in the dark, Bing Bong tried to be rational about the whole thing. It couldn't possibly be the same whistler, right? Well, what happened next only convinced him more. As the whistler lined up with Bing Bong on the lake, they stopped paddling, turned to face him, and let out their signature sound once more. Moments passed, and the whistler didn't move a muscle. Only when the Redditor stood up and shouted straight at them, asking who they were, did they turn and paddle out of sight. It was too dark for Bing Bong to capture much of the actual person in the canoe, but he did manage to film their whistle before they entirely disappeared. Take a listen. You whistling? Is it you? Pretty creepy, right? Was it all just a coincidence? Or had the whistler, whoever or whatever they were, followed the Redditor all the way from Michigan? To this day, Bing Bong absolutely hates going out into the dark, afraid he might encounter the whistler again. With whistling demonic entities being a recurring theme as harbingers of death in several folkloric legends around the world, his fear is certainly understandable. But what do you think? Should we all be keeping an ear out for the whistler? Or is Bing Bong paranoid? Or worse, lying for internet points? Let me know in the comments. Bishopville Lizard Man. At 2 a.m. on June 29, 1988, 17-year-old Christopher Davis was driving home from work in Bishopville, South Carolina, when he blew a tire along the edge of Scape Ore Swamp. Christopher got out of the car to change the tire when he heard what sounded like someone running, getting louder and louder. Then, suddenly, from the darkness, it emerged. A 7-foot-tall humanoid creature with blazing red eyes, green scaly skin, and long black claws. Christopher jumped into his car for safety, but the lizard-like creature attacked it, ripping off the mirror and gouging the roof. Unable to get inside, the creature grew tired and scampered off, leaving Christopher alive to tell the tale. This was the account the 17-year-old immediately gave to the Lee County Sheriff's Department, who didn't exactly take him all that seriously. That was until the Lizard Man struck again. Over the course of the summer, more cars, most of them vacant thankfully, were attacked in the vicinity of Scrape Ore Swamp. Police arrived time and again to find fenders ripped off, antennas bent, and deep scratches along the bodies of the cars. Pretty soon, more people reported seeing an enormous, scaly man lurking in the swampland, and the media absolutely lapped these stories up. The local radio station, WCOS, even offered a $1 million reward to anyone able to capture the creature alive. However, as winter arrived, sightings of the lizard man came to a stop. Its summertime reign of terror was seemingly over, though the legendary figure made brief reappearances throughout the passing decades, with occasional sightings and a smattering of vehicle attacks being reported, always within the vicinity of Bishopville's swamplands. Visitors to Scape Ore Swamp are encouraged to remain vigilant even today, just in case the Bishopville lizard man decides to show its face. So, if you're ever in the area, you better keep an eye out. Whether the lizard man is real, or just a prank-loving teenager in a costume, or even some kind of deformed alligator, encountering it unprepared definitely doesn't seem like fun. Before we wade into the murky waters of our next terrifying swamp discovery, why not take a moment to give this video a thumbs up? And don't forget to subscribe to be amazed so you don't miss any of my latest uploads. Now, I hope you've got your rain boots on because things are about to get muddy. Frozen in time. In spring 2012, the tourists of Sene, a nature reserve in France, were horrified when two incredibly creepy figures appeared seemingly out of nowhere in the swampy marshlands one day. The creatures were pale, thin, and slender, and appeared to be frozen in time. And just as quickly as they appeared, the creatures vanished again. That was until in July 2016. They returned, only this time with 6 more friends. So where did the statuesque creatures come from, and what were they doing in the wetlands of France? Well, as real as the creatures seemed, they were in fact designed and handmade by French sculptor and artist Sophia Prestigiacomo to reflect humankind's oftentimes complicated relationship with nature. Each of the figures are modeled on iron structures with mud and algae, which, after being left to dry, takes on a skin-like appearance. Over time, as the figures slowly started to decompose, this replicated skin changed both color and texture, allowing the figures to eventually blend in with the organic landscape. Even though there's certainly an unsettling, cryptid-like appearance to the design of Sophie's swamp creatures, their shifting nature does give them a certain beauty. That is, if you find loose flaps of swamp water-addled skin attractive. Swamp sirens. Shortly after joining the military, Reddit user HK Fook-et got deployed on a 2 to 4 week field exercise in the swamps of the southern United States. On his 6th night in the swamp, the Redditor and his squad were just dozing off when a spine-chilling sound echoed from somewhere in the woods. It sounded like a mix between a roar and a scream, like no animal any of them had ever heard before. They all darted upright, and as they did, the entire surrounding swamp went quiet. The frogs stopped croaking, the crickets stopped chirping. The only sound that remained was the screaming, which continued to grow louder. Moments passed before suddenly strange lights started to appear in the distance. The Redditor had enough.
Get over here.
Thinking it was just someone playing a joke, he and 2 other soldiers headed toward the lights, while the rest stayed behind at camp. But the farther HK walked, he realized the lights weren't getting any closer, and the ground was starting to get too boggy to navigate. In a way, he felt like they were being put in a trance, lured toward the lights like sailors being ensnared by sirens. This unsettled HK so much that he stopped the other soldiers in their tracks, and the three of them immediately turned back. Only less than 20 feet away, the ear-splitting roar once again echoed out from the darkness in the waterlogged area of the swamp they'd just been retreating from. The soldiers turned and watched in fear as the distant lights traveled higher and higher, like someone scaling a tree at lightning pace. But just like that, the lights and the roar both vanished, and the usual background noise slowly returned to the swamp. With no rational explanation as to what had happened, all the soldiers could do was try to go back to sleep. Except, HK couldn't put the incident out of his mind. When he checked a map of the area on a later occasion, he noticed that the lights had been in a part of the swamp that, after the heavy rains they had experienced at the time, would have been inaccessible to humans. So, what was it that roamed the dark that night? If paranormal explanations float your swamp boat, one explanation might be some
Let's go. Oh my god, that took
ghost
forever.
lights from both English and European folklore that are allegedly seen by travelers at night, especially over bogs and swamps. Will-o-wisps are known to be impossible to catch, and in European folklore, they supposedly lure travelers to their demise. Even though this legend lines
Bro,
up
what do you
with
mean
both
it's just
why
me?
the Redditor couldn't reach the lights, and why he felt entranced by them, there's also a more scientific explanation that's just as intriguing. In modern science, it's generally accepted that the will-o-wisp phenomenon people occasionally report seeing is caused by the oxidation of phosphine, diphosphane, and methane, compounds that are all produced by decomposing plants, which happen to be in abundance in swampy bogs. Since phosphine and diphosphane mixtures can spontaneously ignite upon contact with oxygen, only small quantities are needed to ignite the much more abundant methane to create bright, temporary floating
orange.
fires, or will-o-wisps. Now, even though that could explain the lights, what about the terrible sound? My best guess, it was most likely just a cougar. Here's a clip of what their roar sounds like. Seems to fit the bill, doesn't it? But even though there may be a rational explanation for what this Redditor encountered, I admit, I'd be pretty darn terrified too if I heard that sound, saw those sights, out in the middle of a pitch-black swamp. 2 is a crowd. In July 2020, Peter Joyce, an experienced kayaker, was having the time of his life floating down a section of North Carolina's Waccamaw River he'd never experienced before, when all of a sudden his dream adventure turned into nothing short of a nightmare. As he was paddling downriver, taking in the surrounding swamp and its wildlife, Peter heard what he initially thought was a fish jumping to his left. Well, let's just say it definitely wasn't a fish. Check it out. That thing that charged him and knocked him out of his kayak? An alligator. Throughout the incident, Peter said his mind was entirely blank. He couldn't do anything as the alligator dove at him, nor when it struck the side of his kayak. Luckily, he did manage to grab onto a branch for support, and somehow successfully got back into the kayak before becoming lunch. But even though Peter came away from the incident without a scratch, it did leave a rather deep mark in his mind. Throughout his years of river kayaking, Peter had seen many an alligator splash and make a ruckus in the water. but he never had one continuously charge at him.
Let's go.
It's likely this particular alligator only became aggressive since it was mating season, as is typical in the North Carolina region from June to early July. And even though Peter never did get to fully explore that section of the river before he was attacked, he fully intends to go back. Only next time, he'll probably try to pick a time of year when he's not as likely to rile up the locals. Muddy-handed. In the 1990s, Reddit user Annie Oakley and her husband were staying with her in-laws on an 11-acre wooded swamp, while the pair were waiting for their own place to be move-in ready. Since her husband didn't drive, Annie had to regularly take him to and from his midnight shift at a nearby late-night restaurant. But even though she usually loved going outside after dark, there was just something about her in-laws' property which gave the Redditor the creeps. One night, when her husband was at work, Annie accidentally locked herself out of the house, and with her in-laws away for the night, decided to just sleep in her car. However, sometime around 3 a.m., the Redditor woke up to find her heart inexplicably racing, and her hair standing on end. It was like she had woken up from a
You
nightmare.
got to restart the app.
She didn't remember having one. Annie was just coming to grips with reality when she heard something outside. A dragging noise across the gravel and a faint tapping on the car's exterior. The Redditor looked frantically out the window, but she couldn't see anything in the dark. Was it an animal lurking around outside, or something much more sinister? Annie tried to scare the unwanted visitor off by turning on the car's headlights, but the shuffling movements outside simply wouldn't stop. This continued until just before sunrise, when Annie finally left to pick up her partner from the restaurant. But just because night was over, it didn't mean her problems were something of the past. As soon as Amy reached the restaurant, she hurried inside, feeling thoroughly unnerved. Only when she returned to her car with her husband, she found it splattered with muddy lines. Some still with patches of water plants like duckweed stuck on them. The moment her husband saw it, he turned white as a sheet. Apparently, it wasn't the first time something like that had happened. As a child, he'd been camping outside with his siblings one night when something shuffled into the area around their tents and left muddy, duckweed-riddled handprints all over everything. Annie's husband thought the coincidence was too big to ignore and insisted they stay at the restaurant until it was brighter outside. Since that day, Annie has never gone outside after dark while staying at her in-laws, and she's not the only one. Years later, Annie's 5-year-old daughter began refusing sleepovers at Grandma's because she was too afraid of the monster she had seen in the swamp one night. So, either the Redditor's in-laws have a long-running pranking streak going on, or there's some muddy-handed creature, natural or otherwise, running amok. Either way, I'm not sure I'd like to spend a night there to give whatever it is the National Geographic treatment, would you? Have you ever made any chilling discoveries in a swamp? Let me know in the comments below.
Meet Grammarly Go, your go-to solution for getting quality work done quickly.
Ready for the big picture today, Remy? Oh yeah, you got this.
And ensuring peak productivity when you need it the most.
It was Christmas Eve, 1971. 17-year-old Julianne Kopke and her mother Maria Kopke excitedly boarded Lanza Flight 508. They were flying from the city of Lima, Peru, to spend Christmas with Julianne's father in Panguana, a biological research center in the rainforest where the family lived. It would be a short flight, a little over an hour if they were lucky. But they weren't lucky. Far from it. Midway through the flight, with no warning, the plane broke apart. Julianne was thrown out and suddenly found herself free-falling some 10,000 feet. How would she survive this colossal fall? What had caused the plane to break apart?
Everyone just arguing.
If you want answers to these questions and more, then stay tuned as we explore this unbelievable story of survival against all odds, and many more like it. The day before her fateful flight, Julianne and her mother had attended her graduation ceremony from high school in Lima, Peru.
But I know I just
They
saw
had
someone
originally planned
with
to fly home on the
speedrunning
20th of
skills.
December, but decided to stay a few extra days to attend the ceremony. A fatal mistake. If Julianne and her mother had flown on the 20th as planned, then they would have avoided flying with Lanza, a notoriously shady airline. In the previous 5 years, 2 of their planes had crashed due to pilot errors. They were so distrusted, Julianne's father warned his wife against flying with Lanza. But on Christmas Eve, all other flights were booked, leaving them with no other choice if they wanted to make it home in time for Christmas. Flight 508 had a scheduled stop at Pucallpa, where Julianne and her mother planned to depart and make the rest of their journey home by car. The flight's planned final destination was Iquitos, and it took off without incident with all 86 passengers and 6 crew safely on board. The plane steadily climbed to a height of 21,000 feet, a little under 4 miles above sea level, when all of a sudden the cabin began to rock. A major thunderstorm had formed ahead of them, causing severe turbulence to jolt the plane. Despite the danger, the flight crew decided to continue the journey as they were under pressure to meet the Christmas holiday schedule. So despite the turbulence, they continued on. Inside the cabin, the shaking got so bad luggage came crashing down from the overhead lockers, and air stewards could barely stand. This plane was not built to handle extreme weather at all. Later investigations found it was assembled entirely from spare parts of other planes. A literal patchwork plane. And this underlying weakness in the plane's construction proved deadly when it was struck by lightning, ripping the second-hand fuselage apart. The damage sent the plane into a deadly nosedive, and it began to break up as it fell through the sky. Julianne, strapped in her seat, looked out her window and actually saw the bright flash of the lightning by the plane's engine. She felt the horrifying lurch of the plane suddenly entering a nosedive. The plane fell for what felt like an eternity, but as the fuselage tore itself apart, she was suddenly ripped out of the plane. Still strapped into her seat, and now free-falling from a height of around 10,000 feet, a little under 2 miles apart, she was suddenly ripped out of the plane. Still strapped into her seat, and now free-falling from a height of around 10,000 feet, a little under 2 miles, Julianne knew she wouldn't survive. After all, falling from a height of just 6 feet can be deadly for a human, let alone 10,000. And without a parachute, Julianne would be free-falling at terminal velocity, which is the maximum speed a falling object eventually reaches when air resistance becomes equal and opposite to the downward force of gravity pulling it to the earth. Terminal velocity for a human being free-falling in a stomach-to-earth position is 120 miles per hour. To hit the ground at such speed would be a painful end, to say the least. But Julianne was doomed. That was the last thought that passed through her head before she lost consciousness and descended towards the rainforest canopy. And then Julianne woke up. She was on the ground beneath the canopy, still strapped in her seat. She'd survived the unthinkable. She did have a broken collarbone, a deep gash on her arm, cuts to her legs, and a concussion. But she was still somehow in one piece. How did she do it? Well, Julianne was strapped into the middle seat of a row of 3, which was ripped out as a unit. The 2 empty seats on either side of her acted like a makeshift parachute by increasing the air resistance and slowing her fall. Additionally, Julianne actually fell through the thunderstorm that destroyed the plane. The updraft effect of the storm, where a current of warm rising air is drawn up into the storm clouds, slowed her descent. Though, most importantly, Julianne's fall was broken up. Instead of crashing straight into the ground, she was caught in the rainforest canopy. With trees towering between 20 to 130 feet tall, the chairs had caught on and snapped off layers of tree branches as they fell, crucially slowing Julianne's descent before she hit the ground. Whoa! However, she wasn't out of the woods, or in this case, rainforest, yet. She was all alone, She was injured, she had no idea where she was, and she'd lost her glasses in the fall. Being short-sighted, searching her surroundings for other survivors was going to be incredibly difficult. Although she wasn't completely alone. The Peruvian rainforest is home to plenty of creatures such as jaguars, carnivorous masters of stealth which can sprint up to 50 miles per hour and jump up to 10 feet high. And poison dart frogs, which are difficult to spot, though some of them are so poisonous that a single touch can transfer enough poison to kill 10 men. How was Julianne possibly going to survive without accidentally stepping on a poison frog or becoming a jaguar's lunch? Well, unlike you or me, who would be dead meat in seconds, Julianne had one serious advantage. She'd been raised in the rainforest thanks to her upbringing in the Pamplona research station. And during her time there, she'd learned some survival skills. So having lost one shoe in the crash, she used her remaining shoe to test the ground ahead of her, knowing some snake species camouflage themselves as dry leaves. Luckily, she managed to avoid running into any snakes or other rainforest beasts and eventually found a small creek. She hopped in and continued walking, since walking in the water avoided...
I've been cooped up forever, dude. This is probably a lot for you, huh? Hey, whoa. I thought after the car chase we were boys. What are you? The name's Laura. Come on. Give me a little tap. There you go. Now we're friends. Oh, great. The gang's here. They're more like you?
You brought a human here.
I'm nobody. I ain't even seen her. I'm not even seeing anything right now.
There is a darkness coming. Let them come.
avoided stepping on anything sinister on the forest floor. And one good rule for self-rescue when lost in the wilderness is to follow water downhill, as a water source often leads to a human settlement. Julianne trekked through the stream for 3 days, but on the 4th day she stumbled across something. It was debris from the broken-up plane. She searched through the wreckage, discovering a bag of sweets that became her first meal in days. But she didn't manage to locate any other survivors, so she kept following the stream. The days in the jungle were hot and clammy, but at night it was cold, and all she was wearing was a short sleeveless mini dress. Nevertheless, she did her best to keep herself warm and pushed through night after night. By the 10th day of her journey, the sweets were long gone. She was weak from starvation, and the wound on her arm had festered, with maggots finding their way in. It was at this point she discovered the stream became part of a larger river, and that's when she saw something that gave her hope: an empty boat. At first, she thought she was hallucinating, because she had yet to meet another human so deep in the wilderness. But then, when she touched the boat, she confirmed it was real, which meant other people were nearby. Julianne looked around and discovered a small path leading further into the jungle. She followed it to a small hut with a palm leaf roof. Inside, she found a liter of gasoline. Might not sound all that useful, but she remembered her father had once poured kerosene on a infected wound to remove maggots, and so she poured it on her own maggot-infested arm. It was agony. The maggots desperately tried to escape by burrowing further into her arm, but Julianne successfully removed 30 of them. Now, usually I'd advocate against pouring gasoline onto an open wound. It's incredibly dangerous, as prolonged exposure of gasoline to the skin can cause chemical burns. But Julianne had no other option, and this rudimentary first aid more than likely helped save her life from infection. Even so, if you ever find maggots wriggling in a wound, your first stop should be the hospital, not the gas station. Julianne spent the night in the hut, and the next day she heard voices. The fishermen that used the hut had returned. At first, they were stunned to find this strange girl, but after hearing her story, they gave her proper first aid and transported her to a more inhabited area. Finally, after 11 days lost in the jungle, Julianne was airlifted to the hospital and reunited with her father. Now, you might be thinking, I bet I could have survived 11 days in the rainforest after falling out of a plane. No problem. Well, brace yourself, because 14 other passengers were later discovered to have survived the initial crash, including, tragically, Julianne's mother, Maria. Her injuries were sadly too severe and she succumbed to them before she could be rescued. Maria's body was discovered on the 12th of January, 1972, and later put to rest. Many of the other survivors were also badly injured, but even those that weren't didn't survive the many hidden dangers of the forest. Still think you could have survived? Following her perilous journey, Julianne returned to her parents' native homeland of Germany, where she fully recovered from her injuries. However, even Julianne's rainforest ordeal didn't dampen her enthusiasm for the jungle. She went on to receive a PhD from the University of Munich and returned to Peru to conduct research in mammalogy, specializing in bats. And in 2000, following the death of her father, she took over as the director of the Penguana Research Center. Turns out that you can rescue Julianne from the jungle, but you can't take the jungle away from Julianne. Now, Julianne isn't the only person who has gone through an impossibly dangerous situation and lived to tell the tale. There's so many other incredible survival stories out there, but before we get to those, hit those like and subscribe buttons down below. All done? Great. Now let's meet some more unbelievable survivors who defied the odds. Brain Scrambler. We've all had to deal with a headache at work. Maybe the photocopier stopped working, or the aircon broke, or Derek from finance just won't get off your back. None of us have had a headache on the job that was as bad as theoretical physicist Anatoly Nagorski's. You may think physicists just spend their time looking at whiteboards and arguing over comic books. Oh, wait, that's the Big Bang Theory. Well, in reality, it turns out that theoretical physics can be a whole lot more dangerous. Anatoly was working as a researcher at the Institute for High Energy Physics in Pravdino, Russia, back in 1968. On the 13th of July, he was checking a malfunctioning piece of equipment inside the Institute's particle accelerator. These complex devices fire elementary particles, such as protons, at very high speeds to produce beams of charged particles that physicists can study. It's important to note that the proton beam itself contains a vast amount of radioactive energy. And I'm sure you all know that anything highly radioactive is also deadly. Now, to examine the faulty piece of equipment in the accelerator, Anatoly had to stick his head into the space where the proton beam passes through the accelerator tube. If you just felt yourself shrink away from the screen, your instincts are on point. Because that day it turned out several safety mechanisms had failed, and the machine accidentally activated. At something close to the speed of light, a high-energy proton beam fired through Anatoly's skull. It passed through the back of his head, the lower half of his brain, and out through the left side of his nose, just like a radioactive bullet. Now, for perspective, a lethal dose of radiation for a human is 500 to 600 roentgens. Anatoly's head had received a local dose of 200,000 to 300,000 roentgens. For an even more insane comparison, the worst hit areas from the infamous Chernobyl meltdown only measured in at 20,000 roentgens. Anatoly felt no pain, but he did see a super bright flash. And then he continued working. There were no immediate physical effects from the incident, and so he thought nothing of it. But he was eventually given away when the left side of his face became so swollen, people struggled to recognize him. He was immediately transported to a clinic in Moscow for doctors to observe his deterioration.
Why are you not investing in tax liens? No, seriously. Why are you not investing into one of the most...
It was predicted that given the gigantic dose of radiation he'd been hit with, it was game over for Anatoly. Over the next few days, the skin on the back of his head and the left side of his face peeled away to reveal the path the proton beam had taken. He was monitored closely for further signs of deterioration, but he survived. It seems that because the radiation was focused on a small single path through his body, instead of being bathed in it like most radioactive fallout victims are, the damage was localized, and thanks to that he survived. Though he didn't escape totally unscathed, the nerves on the left side of his head were completely destroyed, paralyzing that side of his face. He also lost hearing in his left ear, replaced by tinnitus, which is a sort of constant ringing sound. Yet despite having a supercharged radioactive beam literally shot through his brain, his intellectual ability was unchanged, and he even went on to complete his PhD. For the first dozen years after the accident, it didn't appear as if he'd suffered any major brain damage other than an occasional mini seizure. These occasionally caused him to blank out of consciousness for several seconds, often leaving him just staring into space. The same way my friends do whenever I tell one of my terrible jokes. Though in later years Anatoly's condition worsened and he has since had 6 larger seizures, the kind of full-body seizure you're likely to have seen in any hospital drama. But even more strangely, the left side of Anatoly's face hasn't aged a day since the accident. When Anatoly frowns, only one half of his forehead wrinkles. You see, wrinkles are caused by the repetitive movement of the facial muscles beneath the skin. When the muscles are frozen, they don't stretch the skin and thus prevent the more noticeable signs of aging, such as smile or frown lines. With half of his youthful looks, Anatoly continued to work at the Institute for High Energy Physics and even held the post of coordinator of physics experiments. No doubt making sure a similar accident never occurred again. Despite his extraordinary survival, Anatoly was forbidden from discussing the accident publicly for over a decade. It occurred under the reign of the Soviet Union, when secrecy of nuclear testing was kept closely under wraps to avoid leaking any information to the US and other Western enemies of the time. Twice a year, Anatoly attended a Moscow radiation clinic to be examined, where he also met with other victims of nuclear accidents who were all similarly sworn to secrecy. It was only after the Soviet Union fell in 1991 that Anatoly was freed from his long-held silence. And it's also why I'm able to tell you this incredible story today. Anatoly is now widely known as someone who has literally redefined the physical limits of human beings and our capacity for survival. He's one super tough physicist, but I bet after that workplace accident, he started wearing a lead-lined hard hat. Call the ambulance. What's on your bucket list? Maybe swim with dolphins or travel to every continent? A popular idea on many people's bucket list is to go skydiving. Given all the crazy stories I've talked about on this channel, you'll never find me jumping out of a perfectly good plane willingly. But none of those stories compare to what happened to the incredibly lucky Joan Leslie Murray. Back in 1999, Joan had recently started her foray into skydiving. On one dive, she decided to try out some new gear when the worst thing that can happen when you're skydiving happened. Her main parachute failed to deploy. From 14,500 feet she plummeted, and it wasn't until she was less than 700 feet from the ground that she managed to open her emergency chute. When she did, she quickly swung out of control and slammed into the ground at a bone-crunching 80 miles per hour. Most of the bones in her right side were crushed, her fillings flew out on impact, and like it couldn't get any worse, she ended up crashing onto a fire ant mound. Man, how unlucky can one lady get? But this ant-filled landing was actually where her luck changed. The fire ants, angered by their mound's new skylight, swarmed Joan, stinging her over 200 times. Each of their stings secreted a venom that contains the chemical piperidine. This causes a burning sensation and blisters the skin. Though in this case, the stinging shots actually saved Joan as they stimulated her nervous system and kept her heart beating until help arrived. Joan spent 2 weeks in a coma following the accident, but after 20 constructive surgeries and 17 blood transfusions, she was released from the hospital 6 weeks later and went on to make a full recovery. Now, you'd think this would have put Joan off skydiving for life, right? Well, unbelievably, she went skydiving again only 2 years later. Move over, Taylor Swift. Turns out Joan here is the real anti-hero. Go with the float. There comes a time in a man's life when he feels lost or unfulfilled, and inevitably makes a bunch of terrible decisions. Classically known as the midlife crisis, it's the time where some men buy a sports car they can't really afford or get a giant phoenix tattoo on their back. I'm looking at you, Ben Affleck. But in the case of one Dougal Robertson, a former British Navy sailor turned dairy farmer, he decided to take his whole family along on his midlife crisis. On January 27, 1971, Dougal, his wife, and their 4 children set out onto the ocean in a schooner, a 43-foot-long sailing boat. Dougal thought that a boat trip around the world would teach his kids some invaluable life lessons, and so the family spent 17 months at sea, sailing from port to port and seeing the world. But it wasn't all plain sailing. On June 15, 1972, the family encountered a group of killer whales off the coast of the Galapagos Islands. Orcas in the wild aren't typically known to attack humans, but perhaps this pod disagreed with Dougal's parenting ideas, or more likely they mistook the boat for whale-like prey and attacked. They bashed the ship and splintered it into pieces. With the schooner rapidly taking on water, the Robertson family were forced to abandon it for a lifeboat and a small dinghy, scrambling to collect as much food as they could. But after just 6 days, the food ran out. The family were forced into survival mode to stay alive. They caught rainwater in containers to drink, but when they ran out of fresh water, they turned to even more drastic measures, drinking turtle blood. While it is possible to stave off dehydration with blood, drinking it can result in hemochromatosis, where the body absorbs too much iron, which eventually damages your internal organs. Still, it's preferable to drinking seawater, the salt content of which dangerously dehydrates you. Turtles became the family's main food supply as they were able to hunt them for meat and melt the fat in the sun to create oil to rub on their skin to keep.
We know you're hovering over that button, but we need your help. We have a better button, we promise. Right.
To keep warm. For a staggering 38 days, the Robertson family were lost at sea, but they managed to survive long enough to eventually be discovered by a Japanese fishing trawler on July 23rd. The family was rescued, and they returned to land. Oh, it was definitely an adventure none of them forgot. I bet the next time Dougal suggested a family road trip, everyone was suddenly very busy. Well, hello there. We've all got a good holiday story, but nothing beats Julie and Liz's whale of a tale. In November 2020, Julie McSorley and Liz Cottrell were kayaking in San Luis Obispo, California. The ocean just off the shore was packed that day with both tourists and marine creatures alike, because humpback whales were feeding on the fish in the bay. For whale watching, it's recommended that you keep at least 300 feet away, roughly the length of a football field. However, Julie and Liz had misjudged the distance. As a result, a tightly packed swarm of fish, known as a bait ball, swam extremely close to their kayaks. Julie and Liz should have taken this as a warning to get out of the way, but it was too late. It took a few moments, but suddenly they realized they were trapped inside a humpback whale's mouth. Were they about to be swallowed whole? Kayaks. Julie and Liz should have taken this as a warning to get out of the way, but it was too late. Extremely close to their kayaks. However, Julie and Liz had misjudged fish in the bay. San Luis Obispo, California. The ocean just off the shore was packed that day with both tourists and marine creatures alike because humpback whales were feeding on the fish in the bay. For whale watching, it's recommended that you keep at least 300 feet away, roughly the length of a football field. However, Julie and Liz had misjudged the distance. As a result, a tightly packed swarm of fish, known as a bait ball, swam extremely close to their kayaks. Julie and Liz should have taken this as a warning to get out of the way, but it was too late. Julie and Liz should have taken this as a warning to get out of the way, but it was too late.
Bro, I have no clue what just happened. Did I?
It took a few moments, but suddenly they realized they were trapped inside. Too late. It took a few moments, but suddenly they realized they were